Unlike Sadhguru, I'm a little nervous. Actually, unlike Sadhguru, I'm a little nervous that you're going to think what I say is complete crap. Something that obviously doesn't bother him. There. So I'm completely intimidated by this event because over the last 2 days, I've met so many incredible people who are doing such great work, and they're helping and they're changing and they're so focused. And I've been going around telling people I'm a TV journalist, and they're like, mainstream TV journalist. Some of you may know I've actually exited television entirely about a month ago. I'm planning my next phase, and just to bring you up to speed of what I've been doing to fill in the blanks to Sachin's story. I was the editor of a channel called Mirror Now. We launched it nearly now 3 years ago. The idea behind that channel was, while there were several news channels in India, there wasn't any news channel that was focusing on the citizen. We actually did some research at the time when we were launching that channel, because I had to answer the question to management as to why India needs another national news channel. We discovered that everybody at prime time was talking about Pakistan. So it was not that we needed another news channel, we needed one. And so we launched a channel that focused on citizens and the things that citizens go through. The roads, the traffic, the air pollution, the water pollution, safety, schools, education, health, that sort of thing. And we built an entire sort of community around it, a community of parents who are invested in improving the education system, a community of the LGBTQI community that was working towards, at that point, removing 377, bringing in transgender rights. We've gotten halfway. We haven't achieved all of it. We created a community of young people who wanted to save the environment, people who wanted equal rights, equal pay, all of those things. Safety for women. Unfortunately, today I stand before you, and anyone who works towards safety for women will realize over the last 3 days that we have entirely failed to do our job, because our country today is discussing the religion of the accused of the Hyderabad rape case, instead of talking about whether or not the police did its job, whether her life could have been saved, and what we need to do to make our cities safer for women who leave their workplaces at 9 o'clock at night. There's so much more work to be done. And what I want to talk about right now, away from what we did at Mirror Now, is why we're failing. And I think that's an important step in solving problems, is to first figure out what we're doing wrong. A conversation I've had with several of the other journalists present at this event has been that there are 4 or 5 very loud news channels that have given the entire sector or the entire community of journalists a bad name, because everybody thinks this is what the media is. And people think that because they're loud, because they have reach, because they have the ability to change people's minds. And we have to ask ourselves how we got here and what we're doing wrong. If this works, we have more than 400 news channels in India. 400 news channels. I'm not talking about papers and, independent websites and all of these other things. News channels, if we count all the regional guys and the guys in different languages and things like that, the total business of television is worth 2,200 crore rupees on last count. And yet somehow everyone I meet is not satisfied as a customer of these news channels. Could you tell me, if you are not a satisfied customer, could you tell me why? I'm giving you an opportunity. Bhadas nikal do, yaar, bol do. They don't cover the news anymore. Very fair point.
They are not very objective in covering it.
Yes, ma'am, you're absolutely right. Anyone? Very opinionated. Biased. Yeah.
Lying.
Yes. Paid news. Repeat news. Yes. Everything is breaking news. Sorry? Yes, no attention to detail, did someone say?
Yeah.
Yes, you did, yes. Scaring the citizens. All of that is very right. True. And I want to tell you why they're doing this, because we have to understand this problem, right? So there's a great deal of cord cutting that's happening. And you all know, because a lot of you, I'm assuming, have already cut that cord. 10 years ago or 6 years ago, we went to television for 4 things: live sports, general entertainment. So you watched Friends, you watched Sas Bahu, all of that. We watched movies, and you watched the news. Live sports, Hotstar has taken completely. Movies and general entertainment, you're now watching Netflix and Amazon and all of these other guys. So there's disruption in all these spaces. News is on that verge of disruption. But somehow, online platforms haven't fully taken everybody away from news. So it's waiting for a disruption. But as 5G comes into India, that disruption will become even more obvious. There's something called a new tariff order that TRAI brought out. It just like drove the knife even further into the hearts of these channels, where basically, I'm sure you know that your Tata Sky guy would have come home and said you have to subscribe to every channel, and that's a really complicated system. The Tata Sky guys haven't fully understood it, so they haven't been able to implement it, and a lot of people have just fallen off the grid. There was a report that came out that said 20 million DTH connections have become inactive in the last 1 year, because people are just cutting that cord. And that's obviously putting pressure on the TV guys. Cost cutting. We know that we are now in an economy that's growing at 4.5%. And that's bad news on many levels, but particularly bad news for these guys, because when things are tough, companies first cut their marketing spends on television because it's the most expensive and you can invariably do without it. So there's a pressure on costs. And when that pressure becomes really hard, attention to detail goes out of the window. When I started my career about 15 years ago, I worked for CNBC TV18. I was part of an investigative team. We called ourselves a small team. We were 12 people. It was a luxury by any yardstick now. And we would spend 2 months sometimes working on one story and only reporting to that one team lead we had to talk to. We didn't have to show up every day and deliver a story because they knew what we were working on. That has become a complete luxury, even sometimes in newspapers, but specifically for television. As a result, you have what I call point and shoot reporting, where this reporter is standing in front of Matrushri and saying, this is the gate of Uddhav Thackeray's house. Behind this gate, there's half a kilometer of road. And then there is a house in which there is a meeting. That reporter is adding zero value. But they have to feed the monster 24/7, so they're just standing and pointing at stuff. This bridge has fallen. There's no time to actually RTI the documents of who made that bridge and find out what went wrong. You're just pointing and you're talking. And that's filling the void with nonsense, but very little value. And that has become a serious problem. And of course, the battle for ratings. And this is the hardest thing that happens to television. The main source of revenue for television is advertising. Advertisers don't give a damn about the quality or the ethics of the journalism you're putting out. 2 of the biggest English news channels are Times Now and Republic. They get the lion's share of the advertising revenue because when the media manager is deciding, all he cares about are the eyeballs. So they will pick the top 2 guys, the first guy and the second guy, and the rest of them will just get scraps. So as a result, there is a battle to just gain more and more of your eyeballs, to get your time, to get your attention, which is why there is noise, which is why there is so much dramatization of news. So what happens when, as a journalist, all I care about is grabbing your attention? That happens. This was a true story. This went on air. He is wearing socks on his wrists, in case you were wondering. So the idea now is to be as dramatic as possible, right? You know what was he reporting on? He was reporting on the Chandrayaan launch. Which is an unmanned. Some of us hoped we could put him on it, but it's completely ridiculous. This is not even, I mean, it's as far away from news as you could possibly be. And everything you see on television is deliberate. So if you say there's too much noise, it's because there's some audio guy with all faders up like this. And because the anchor has encouraged everybody to speak at the same time, because it's very obvious that if I wanted one person to speak at a time, you can tell them, now you speak, now you speak. You tell them all to shout at the same time, you encourage the noise, you think it's interesting. Because the thing that television guys have realized is that while you watch a movie, you pay money, You take time out of your life, you go to the movie hall, you park your car, you buy your popcorn, you switch off your phone, you sit in a dark room. You've now scolded someone for not standing for the national anthem. Now you've given 3 hours of your day to watch this movie, right? If you watch something on your phone, it's private. But when you're watching something on television, your dog is barking, your doorbell is ringing, your maid is asking you what to make for dinner, your child is crying, everybody's trying, your phone is buzzing, everybody's trying to get your attention. So these guys are now forced to make it seem like what I'm saying is so important that you can't take your eyes off it. So there's this, you cut the frame really close, you feel like this person is in your face, right? Because if you do a 3-button frame, now we're sitting so far away from each other, sit really close to each other. What I'm saying is really important, it's really important, it's breaking, it's really important, it's really important. That's how we wind up doing what we're doing, because the idea is if I can get you to watch for 1 minute, I've now registered you as a viewer. That's all I want. What we need to realize about news, as it is on television right now, is that you are not the customer. It doesn't serve you. The advertiser is the customer. You are the commodity. Your attention is what I'm commoditizing and packaging and selling to somebody else. I don't care that your needs are served. I don't care that your issues are being looked at. I care that I've got your attention for long enough to be able to commoditize you to my actual customer, who is the advertiser. Now we have to ask who the advertiser is and why this is a problem. So what is really the problem then when television stops, news stops serving you and starts serving the advertiser? Now the other journalists in the room will roll their eyes and say, this is so obvious. This is day 1 of journalism school. When you are an undergrad and you join the journalism course in college, they teach you this on first day. Truth and accuracy. Now you'll all say, my God, do we actually have to point that out? Truth and accuracy, do we have to point that out? Yes. All true stories, guys. And I remember this day very clearly. We used to work in Kamla Mills, our office burned down. So we were actually working out of a conference room. At 2 a.m., we got the news that Sridevi had passed away. The next day, I spent the entire day making phone calls to Dubai. We sent reporters to the hospital. We sent reporters to the Indian office, the Foreign Commission, the High Commission there. We made as many phone calls as we could. We couldn't find a single shred of evidence that there was any foul play. But other channels were doing this. They were like, Sridevi is 5.5 feet, bathtub is this much, she would never fit. All of this was going on. Truth and accuracy. There was no truth, there was no accuracy, they didn't care. And I remember the danger with this is one young reporter came up to me and she said, what will you do? Because I'd chosen not to do that story. We said, we won't do the story. And nobody watched my channel that day because we were not doing that story, but it was fine. We chose not to do the story. And this reporter came up to me and she said, but what will you do tomorrow if it turns out that there was foul play? And the answer is, then we'll report it tomorrow. Because that's the job. It's not to sit around and speculate how this happened. Thank you. But to actually report the facts when they happen. I mean, the kind of things that were done and said that day, putting at risk a family that was already grieving, without any evidence, is one of the problems we have. Now, all true stories, guys. Okay, what is the problem with independence? As a journalist or an editor, can I be objective about you tomorrow if I'm in your office today with my hand out asking for advertisements? No, I can't. What's wrong with this photograph? Actually, we don't have enough time. Mr. Ramdev, he's no Baba of mine, Mr. Ramdev, should have been asked why the advertising standards has pointed out that all his Ayurvedic stuff is not really Ayurvedic. He should have been asked about his production. He should have been asked about the numbers of Patanjali. He should have been asked about the forests that are being chopped down to put his new factories and how he acquired that land. These are all issues in the public domain that this journalist never asked. What they did instead was this. Now, this is the front portion of this photograph is very distracting, but we must also pay attention to what's on the screen behind it. Where is that independence that the journalist is supposed to have? And how is this serving you in any way? This is worse than that Saas Bahu serial where the woman turns into a snake. Here the snake is already obvious. Fairness and impartiality. And it comes back again and again to advertising. The government of India spent over 5,000 crore rupees in advertisements in 5 years. For a media that is, an industry that is starved for money right now, and I'm really saying starved for money right now, can you pass up this kind of money? 2,600 crore rupees on television, 2,300 crore rupees on print media, 217 crore rupees for the Times of India alone, 100 crore rupees for Dainik Jagran. This is all Janhit mein jari public service advertising. This information is in the public domain. It's available it's out from RTI, it's available for everybody to see. We have to ask ourselves, if this is the kind of money, can media then be critical of that same government? Short answer is no. It can't. And so now, who is this media serving? Is it serving you? No. Is it telling you the truth? Highly unlikely. In order to gain the advertisements and to gain the eyeballs, in order to gain the advertisements, they're not only now agreeing with the mob, they're egging on the mob. Because they honestly believe that doing that will gain them more viewership and will gain them favor with whichever government of the day. Now, I should also point out here, this is true of state governments as well. Every government has a budget to spend on public service advertisements. So this happens in smaller and smaller pockets. So even in regional media, there'll be those who serve the government and those against, and the ones who serve the government are the ones who will get all the PSA advertisements for that term. As citizens, that's something we should worry about a great deal. Humanity. The result, and someone pointed out, they don't tell the real stories, because I am looking for the largest collection of eyeballs. I will talk about Ayodhya. I will talk about Sabrimala. I will not talk about the real stories. We talked about solution journalism yesterday and why it is that we're not able to focus on stories about human beings because, and in newsrooms, the word sexy is used very loosely. That this is a sexy story, it will do really well. But what that actually means is that this is the story where the largest, perhaps, collection of audience will be interested in. And so I will get more hits, more viewers, more readership, more TRP. So as a result, the smaller stories get pushed either to the corner or don't get focus. So Mahul, for example, and I always talk about this story because it's something that I feel very, very strongly about. How many of you live in Mumbai? Oh, nice group. Have you ever been on the Eastern Freeway? And you've seen on one side, there's this refinery with that eye of Sauron going constantly. There's a MADA housing where the people from the Tansa pipeline have been moved from the government, by the government of Maharashtra 3 years ago. They live 400 meters from the refinery. Nowhere else in the world are human beings so close to a refinery. If you visit those houses, there is an Erin Brockovich story under our noses in Mumbai. Little children with massive sores on their bodies. In every home, someone's either got tuberculosis or died of tuberculosis or has cancer or maybe even worse. We've been campaigning to the government of Maharashtra to move these people out of there for 2 years and it hasn't happened. But these are stories that should be front-facing, prime-time human stories. They don't find space. For a very sad reason, because too few people impacted by it. Not a national issue. Delhi mein log kyun dekhenge? Bangalore mein log kyun dekhenge? And when journalists don't take up these stories, the people of Mahul then are sacrificed to that battle. Health, education, policing, we know, 2 minutes, okay? We know that, I mean, from all the conversations that we've had and from the story in Hyderabad, that the right questions are not being asked by the media. And finally, accountability, apologizing. Journalists are human beings, they will make mistakes. There are errors that happen all the time, especially on live television where there's some kid typing something that goes straight on air. You will have issues. To apologize, to correct errors. Which television channel apologized for speculating on Sridevi's death when they did? It's been a year now. Not one. I mean that we know for sure was the lack of accountability, right? Because we know they all got it wrong, but nobody has bothered to apologize because they don't feel accountable to anyone. They have to self-regulate and keep up standards because, as all journalists will tell you, you cannot invite the government to regulate journalism. That's a completely new can of worms. But if journalists themselves are not going to self-regulate and maintain standards, then we are going into very grey territory. So what we can do, support independent journalists. Be prepared to pay for news. Because if you want news to serve you, if you want to be the final customer, then you have to be able to pay for that service. It's been said that journalists or news agents, news organizations have already made the mistake of letting the horses bolt before we lock the stable doors by giving away news for free. But at some point, as citizens who demand accountability and better service from journalists, you have to be willing to pay and to sustain those journalists. Otherwise, they're going to make somebody else their master because journalists are still people who have to pay rent, they have to pay school fees, they have to just simply live their lives. And finally, this I ask you honestly, don't be a patron to journalists who don't respect you, just don't watch them. Cut that cord if you have to. Stop watching that news channel. Stop following them on Twitter because at the end of the day, that's the only language they understand. Thank you.